In the small village of Webberville, Travis County, in just over a year, all the residents disappeared without a trace, with the exception of one retired woman. The policemen could only throw up their hands because there were no traces. What happened in this quiet and peaceful place in 2003? Today we will analyze with you in one video 3 unthinkable stories about which it is impossible to keep silent. Who are they? The oldest serial killers, and how did they manage to take lives so easily at such an advanced age? I want to ask each of you to put a like under the video right now and subscribe to the channel. In this way, more and more people will be able to get acquainted with this story. If you do not like the video or do not want to continue watching it, you can remove the like at any time. Just a reminder that you're not rating a horror story. Village of Webberville, Travis County, Texas, November 2005. There were only 6 houses left in the village with people living in them. 911 was called in by a woman. She said her brother, Joseph Gilbert, was missing without a trace. He usually came to visit a relative in the village several times a month, but now he had been missing for 5 weeks. The woman came to visit her brother in the village. The door of the house was opened by Joseph's wife, Allison. She said that Joseph had been gone for a month and a half. He left home after we had a fight. I called relatives and acquaintances. No one has seen him, Joseph's wife recounted. Investigators went to the village where the missing man lived. It turned out to be a small, dying village with 6 yards, 2 of which were already empty. At that time, it was inhabited by only 5 people. From talking to the locals, it turned out that Joseph drank little, but when he did, he quarreled a lot with his wife. After the last scandal, Joseph became very angry, left Allison, and drove off to an unknown destination. She named several options, including the city of Dallas, said he went to earn money. Naturally, an APB was sent out, but the search for the missing person did not yield positive results, the prosecutor said. This is where the creepy story of this village only begins. 2 months passed, and there was still no information about Joseph. From his village came a new report of a missing person. This time, 63-year-old Rose Adams is missing. The pensioner was being sought by her ex-husband. Rose and I lived in the village at my apartment. A year ago we had a fight and she left for a neighboring village. But 2 weeks ago, Rose came to me and said she was going to live in Dallas with her relatives. She gave me her address, her phone number. I went to see her off, but Rose was gone. The door was locked, the husband testified. Police checked the information. The pensioner really lived in Webberville. Neighbors assured that she voluntarily went to the northern capital. Joseph's wife even said that she herself accompanied her with bags to Dallas. We bought alcohol at the store and set off and went to the river to have a drink before we left. There were 5 of us, all villagers. After that, the men went home and I walked Rose to the bus stop and put her on the bus, from Gilbert's testimony. Investigators had no reason to believe that Rose had had an accident, but they were never able to find her. A month later, in February, another disappearance. Andrew Wilson filed a report from a neighboring village. He claimed his friend George Schmidt was missing. Jacob Schmidt, born 1959, married, divorced in 2000, and moved to the village of Webberville, Andrew Wilson said of the friend. After the 2 disappearances, there were only 3 residents left in Webberville: Allison Gilbert, Andrew Wilson, and Emma, a country girl who came only on weekends. Because of the lack of companionship, Andrew Wilson began to be in the neighboring village more often, but from the middle of February 2006, he stopped appearing at his friends' houses. Andrew Wilson himself decided to visit him, but the door and windows were boarded up. 2 neighbors surprised Andrew Wilson by saying, "I'm tired of everything. I must have gone to Dallas." Andrew Wilson was perplexed because his friend had not even come to say goodbye. Andrew Wilson did not believe the neighbors and called 911. A very interesting picture emerged. A 3rd villager had taken a bus to Dallas and disappeared. Investigators have been left with their hands up in the air. There are fewer and fewer residents in the village, all of them disappearing without a trace until the last one. Investigators hoped it was just a coincidence, but alas, 911 received another report. A woman's body was found in a pond near Webberville by local residents. The victim was immediately identified. She turned out to be Emma, one of the few residents who until then had been presumed alive. The experts who examined the remains came to an unequivocal conclusion. Emma's death was the result of a head injury. Simply put, she had been taken from her life. The police immediately began questioning the remaining locals. They found out that the house in the village Emma used as a summer house and lived in Dallas with her daughter and son-in-law. She came back almost every weekend. Not waiting for Emma to return to town, the relatives became concerned and asked a family friend who lived in a neighboring village to go visit her and see if everything was okay. No one was at home, and Emma's only remaining resident and neighbor in the village, Allison Gilbert, was surprised to be told, "Don't you know, Emma went to Dallas." The elderly person even recalled waving to her as she left. The family friend knew for a fact that she had not returned to Dallas. Alexander went to the spot where the neighbor had last seen Emma and found her body. After this unexpected discovery, rumors spread throughout the neighborhood. There was no longer any doubt that all the missing villagers had been brutally murdered, but the question remained, by whom? Studying the identity of the deceased, detectives came across a curious fact. In 2001, an exemplary mother and grandmother was in court. On the homestead plot, Emma then were found illegal crops of illicit drugs. Investigators began to think about the connection between the elderly woman's past and her murders, but no leads were found. The last person who had contact with the deceased was neighbor Allison Gilbert. Theoretically, she could have been involved in the taking of her life, especially since all but one of the residents were dead at the time. Investigators began a thorough background check on the elderly. And that's when some surprising details came to light. Allison Gilbert, born 1952 in Austin. In 1992, she was convicted of assault, sentenced to 10 years in prison. This information was listed on her criminal record. Allison Gilbert's victim was her own mother. The court took into account that Gilbert wrote a confession and gave a not the harshest sentence. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. After her release, she moved to the region and began to live and work on a local farm. The villagers were not aware of Gilbert's past, so no one was afraid of her. But, as it turned out, very in vain. Investigators decided to learn more about her past and requested the entire criminal record from the archives. What they found there shocked everyone. On the eve of the massacre of her mother, Gilbert sold the apartment and, in a short period of time, spent all the money. The relative began to accuse her of stealing from the family, but after a while, relations improved. On the fateful day of the murder, the mother asked her daughter to do her hair. Gilbert saw a heavy metal mortar on the table and used it to commit the crime. Emma's murder was similar. Experience told her she had to act decisively. There was no direct evidence, so the police served a search warrant and suggested that the elderly woman write a confession. The grandmother did not hesitate long and agreed to tell the details of what had happened in this gloomy village. While Gilbert was describing her crimes, the investigators were conducting a search. A calendar hanging on the wall caught their attention. It was from last year, and one of the dates had a red cross painted on it. Allison tore herself away from the affidavit and said, "My spouse died on this day." The investigators looked at her with surprise, and a question popped into her mind. Did her husband die himself? As it turned out, Allison's husband was the first person to mysteriously disappear in the village. It happened in November 2005. All subsequent confessions, Gilbert dispelled all doubts about the events in the village. It turned out that this thin, elderly peasant woman, who was 55 years old at the time of the incident, had wiped out the entire village. One day, Joseph Gilbert took a walk and did not return home late at night, as he was annoyed by the eternal quarrels with Allison. The couple had a big fight about it, and for the first time went to separate rooms for the night. In the morning, Allison went to visit her husband. He was sitting with his back to the door and did not see that Allison was holding a hammer. A woman came up behind her and killed her husband, just like she did to his mother. After that, she dragged him by his feet outside to an iron stove, in which she burned her cohabitant. However, information about his death varies, according to other reports. Gilbert dragged the body to the river, in which she drowned it. Eventually, after disposing of the remains, she returned home and marked the date on the calendar so as not to forget to memorialize her spouse. Through the loss of her husband, Gilbert was left destitute, but neighbors did not let her starve. They helped her with money or food. Rose Adams was especially concerned. Allison Gilbert became a frequent guest in her house. However, in January, the she-wolf began packing for Dallas to visit relatives. She actually celebrated her departure on the riverbank. The weather was bad, disposed to socializing. Together, Allison went back to the house to get her things. They had a few more drinks, and then Rose discovered that some of her savings were missing. She suspected Gilbert of being responsible. Allison was outraged. She went into the next room and came back with a wire in her hand. She buried her friend's body in the yard. Allison's life savings had indeed been stolen. One day, Jacob Schmidt came to visit Allison. After talking, Jacob doubted that Rose Adams had really gone to Dallas. In addition, expressed suspicion about Joseph's disappearance. Allison didn't argue or ask for proof. The elderly man calmly went into the house and returned with a pot of potatoes and a hammer, handing him an appetizer and telling him she wanted to drive a nail in the fence. Jacob didn't suspect a thing. Allison's body was treated the same way as her husband's. Over the weekend, Emma, a country girl, arrived in the village. Allison was at first happy to see her, as she was lonely. But then she began to feel that she was looking at her with suspicion. The weekend passed quickly. Josepha had already left her lot, but she didn't notice Allison following her. The neighbor had a brick in her hand. After gathering all the evidence, investigators took the case to trial. In the summer of 2006, the trial began. The court set the maximum sentence that could be given to the elderly and sentenced Gilbert to 21 years in prison. Allison Gilbert was unrepentant of her atrocities. The monster who massacred 4 people went to jail. Since then, no one else lives in the village. In 2027, the elderly was supposed to be released. However, in 2019, she ran out from illness. This is a very gruesome story that you may have never heard of, but now we will move with you to an equally gruesome topic. In March 2000, a man knocked on the door of the Mission City Police Department. He told police officers that he had found a sugar sack with blood dripping from it in a dumpster outside a house on Maple Street. Inside were human body parts. An unknown maniac used to scare the whole city with such finds in the late 90s. Body parts were found near rivers, in the woods, and even near schools. Police began patrolling the neighborhood in search of the maniac. They were looking for a surgeon, a pathologist, or a butcher. Hardly anyone thought that an unremarkable elderly man living across the street from the zoo was guilty of the crime. At the trial, the grandfather shouted, "Citizens of the judges, let me go. I won't do it again." Steve King was sure he had done nothing wrong, for he had taken the lives of exceptionally bad, unfit women. King's life was quite ordinary. He was born in a small town, graduated from high school. He studied badly, but nothing bad could not be said about him. After graduating from school, he moved to Novosibirsk. There, King got a job at the factory, where he worked almost all his life. At this period of life, Steve became an exemplary family man and a loving father. The man married and raised a daughter. A wonderful life was replaced by a series of failures. And in 1988, Steve's life changed forever. That year was fateful for Steve. His wife died of illness, and the man was left alone. Daughter, by that time, had already found her own family. Against the background of alcohol abuse, Steve King's health deteriorated, and soon the man had a stroke. After the disease, Steve did not even think to give up drinking and casual intimate relations. It is known that in his youth, King was treated for syphilis and had meningitis, from which he began to hear poorly in one ear. After he suffered a stroke, doctors strictly forbade him to drink alcohol. But Steve did not listen to the specialists and continued in the same spirit. The man had one peculiarity. He loved sexual acts, literally could not live without them, but women, 53-year-old widower, frightened. No one hurried to get acquainted with an unkempt, deaf, and elderly man. The only people interested in King were alcoholics, prostitutes, and the homeless, those who could get some benefit from him. Steve was fine with that. He didn't care what his mistresses looked like. In the early 90s, King, from a sexual giant, as he considered himself, turned into impotent. At first, the elderly man was very worried, tried to get treatment, and then almost accidentally discovered that he could get pleasure for himself in another way. With the help of reprisals, King committed his first deprivation of life in April 1996. His first victim, a 35-year-old woman of easy behavior, the elderly met at the train station and invited to his home to drink alcohol. Then, of course, called to bed, and once again convinced that from now on can only compose stories about intimate exploits. This sent Steve King into a rage. When the woman went to the bathroom, he caught up with her, and from the back attacked her with a stick, striking her already lifeless body. Steve King experienced unparalleled pleasure and continued on his bloody path. He followed the same pattern. He looked for a homeless girl, alcoholic or a prostitute at the train station. He brought her to the house, and there he attacked her. Some of them he strangled, others he drowned in the bathtub or took their lives with a knife. Steve would flush their insides down the drain, throwing the remaining body parts in the garbage can. As victims, he chose women and girls of no fixed abode, alcohol abusers, and persons of easy behavior. Such a choice of victims is explained by the fact that these persons will not be searched for, and the crimes will remain unsolved. Once Steve King was not lazy and took the remains on the highway, where he got with bags in the passenger transport with several transfers. The last murder Steve King committed on March 5, 2000. He separated the parts of his victim with a bathtub. The remains threw in a dumpster close to his home. When morning came, 911 was contacted by a man who discovered a bloody sugar sack. The search operation was conducted on a large scale. Hundreds of homes and thousands of apartments were searched in the neighborhood where the body was found. The work with witnesses was intensified. Surveillance was organized. Steve King wasn't apprehended until 2000. By that time, he had already taken the lives of 9 women of different ages, from 18 to 55 years old. Steve King specifically asked new acquaintances if they had relatives or friends, and chose lonely. At the time of his arrest, King's home was found to be full of women's belongings. Here's what the elderly maniac said in the first interrogations. "I took the lives of exceptionally degraded people who are hard to call women, homeless, alcoholics. Such people are a nuisance to society." Psychiatrists diagnosed the Ripper's grandfather with necrosidism, a disorder in which a person derives sexual pleasure from abusing the bodies of his victims. However, a full psychiatric evaluation found the maniac sane and aware of his actions. The trial of Steve King took place in May 2001. There was an extremely foul odor emanating from the defendant in the small regional courtroom. Despite the heat, King was wearing a warm jacket. Of Steve King's relatives, only his sister Nina was present at the trial. Daughter did not appear at the trial. The woman came only during the investigation, and that once to testify about her father. She spoke badly of her father and stopped all relations with him. According to the law, King, who was 66 years old at the time, cannot be sentenced to capital punishment because of his age. The prosecutor asked to give the maniac 20 years in prison. The court proved the elderly grandfather's involvement in 9 massacres. However, it took into account mitigating circumstances, age, disability, assistance in solving crimes, and sentenced him to 19 years. At the trial, the maniacal grandfather begged to be released. In prison, the inmates did everything to make the cruel executioner very bad, and Steve King was afraid he wouldn't survive. Steve was right. He passed away 2 years after he was sentenced. The official document says that he died in February 2003 from cardiac arrest at the age of 67. Such stories about grandmothers or grandfathers who became violent maniacs are quite few, but they do exist. Now, we're going to talk to you about the last, but probably the most gruesome story. We're going to travel back to Romania in 1838. In that year, a sweet little girl was born to a wealthy family. Her parents named her Drakshin. From a young age, she was loved and pampered. For that time, the girl received an excellent education. Her parents were well off and spared no expense on private schools and the best teachers. Anna knew 5 languages, was well versed in medicine, seriously engaged in chemistry. What a brilliant future awaited the girl. Only in 20 years, she had an affair with an Austro-Hungarian officer. The military man rewarded the inexperienced Anna with a venereal disease and disappeared. The deceived girl was greatly disappointed in men and hated everyone. However, this arrangement did not suit the parents. At that time, it was necessary to give daughters in marriage, which was done by the father and mother. In time, the family moved to Serbia. There, Anna got married. In marriage, the couple had 2 children, but they all died early. Someone connects this with the fact that Anna was sick with syphilis, and someone said that it was with children, whom she very much disliked, the woman began her bloody path. After almost 20 years of marriage, not old yet, husband suddenly died. Nothing is written anywhere about the cause of death, so we can only guess. After the death of her husband, it turned out that her husband had brought the family to ruin, even though he was initially very wealthy. The woman was not satisfied with the lack of money. She did not want to ask her parents for help. Anna decided to earn money herself, using her knowledge and skills. She set up a chemical laboratory in a wing of her house and began practicing medicine. People were eager to ask her for help. She was indeed a master of her craft. She mixed herbs and chemicals with knowledge and cured many people. The peasants almost prayed to Anna. Because of the title of chief healer, she began to earn very good money, but she wanted more and more. Soon Anna began to make mixtures that helped boys not to go to the army. Not everyone survived after such preparations. Guys turned pale, vomited for days, had weakness. Not every organism could withstand it. After several fatalities, the woman decided to close the business. One day Anna was talking to an acquaintance who complained about her husband's constant cheating. Anna offered the woman 1 mixture, after which her husband would no longer go to other women. However, this had its price. A plan appeared, how you can make a lot of money. Now her clients were local married women, resentful of their husbands, inattentive, angry, unfaithful, and lazy. Sometimes even those who regularly raised their hands on them. To begin with, Anna tried to spread a rumor about herself. As a young girl, she sold her soul to the devil in exchange for the ability to make a love potion, as if this drink can return marital happiness or deliver a woman from an evil husband. Mysterious rumors turned out to be a great advertisement. Every night, women wrapped in dark shawls began to appear at Anna's house. The enchantress sold each such lady a vial of liquid and said to pour it into the mushroom soup. And she was not deceived. The husband, having tasted the magic soup, soon became quiet and silent. Because they were dying. Women believed it was magic. In extreme cases, they blamed it on stale mushrooms from which the soup was made. And if they realized that they had poisoned their husbands, they kept silent so as not to be responsible for the murder. After all, they poured the potion into the plates with their own hands. Anna's business was doing very well. There are always women who are dissatisfied with their husbands. Each vial was very expensive, but the clients found the money. The healer had been in the business for decades. She only made a mistake when she was 88 years old. Grandmother Anna was let down by a relative of one of her clients. The woman's name was Sophia Mirova. She wanted to get rid of the evil father-in-law, who had a habit of raising his hand on his entire family, sparing neither children nor women. But she herself was afraid to spike his potion. She persuaded her niece. The girl did the right thing. The girl wanted to brag to her friends, and the rumors started. Pulled the string, untangled the ball. That's who helped poison an old man, Baba Anna. In addition to the rumors, the police became interested in the unusual grandmother. On their desks by that time, there were already about 100 statements about strange deaths of men. Only then did the investigation begin in earnest. Having collected a lot of evidence, witnesses and participants in the crimes, the police were horrified. It turned out that Baba Anna had managed to poison more than 150 men with her potions. And that's just the cases they were able to find out about. Samples from her chemical laboratory sent to scientists, and the bodies of recently deceased men were exhumed and found out. The magic potion contained doses of arsenic, which were supplemented with plant toxins in different proportions. The herbalist was very thoughtful and selective. Pure arsenic would work immediately, and she needed to avert suspicion. So the herbal supplements delayed the client's death for a week, if not more. Finding poisonous herbal components in bodies was difficult enough. Anyway, Grandma had learned chemistry and medicine very well in her youth. The trial began in June 1929. In court, the prosecutor demanded the death penalty for Grandma Anna. However, the herbalist recognized only an accomplice in all cases because the wives committed the murder, and Anna was sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment. All the women who poisoned their husbands were found guilty and sentenced to life terms. Anna was released after 8 years. She was 98 at the time, probably helped by generous legal fees. She made a lot of money. It's not without reason that she charged about $2,000 for a bottle, if converted to today's money. Everyone was sure that she had also taken her husband's life with the help of her love drink, but by that time it could not be proved. Anna lived out the rest of her days peacefully in her estate. She died at the age of 100. One more interesting remark. Grandmother was already prosecuted in 1914, when several young men who did not want to join the army were killed, but was acquitted due to lack of evidence. Do you think the grandmother received the punishment she deserved? And which story was more horrible and cruel? Write your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to be the first to know about new crime stories.